let's go to, I see my next guest in the background. We are joined with the man himself, Caleb Maupin. How you doing, Caleb? You doing okay today?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I am doing well. Better that you are with me, of course. I'm getting more familiar with the time zone. So the 15-minute skew that we're stuck with here in Nepal, I'm getting more used to it. Thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. He's director of the Center for Political Innovation. Caleb is a prolific author. He writes constantly. I am super jealous of that. I wish I could sit down and write something as opposed to just doing videos. Caleb, what is the name of your latest book, or the book that you want to give access to, just so the
I'm
audience will know?
always writing different stuff. I mean, we got Trotsky and the Neocons. That's a book I've been doing a lot of interviews about lately. Trotsky and the Neoconservatives. That book has gotten quite a bit of attention. People are quite interested in how the trajectory of neoconservatism, rooted in the left-wing break from the Soviet Union, et cetera. So, yeah. But I've got a new website also, calebmaupinbooks.net. So you can see all my books there, my new website, calebmaupinbooks.net. So, yeah.
Excellent. Caleb, I brought you on to have a conversation. I guess there are two things. Putin is going to India. There's that. But the thing I want to hit first has to do with what is taking place in Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, Syrvesk, some of the other regions that I would have a difficult time pronouncing, so I'm not going to try. The one that's taking place in Pokrovsk is getting a huge amount of attention just because there's a cauldron in Pokrovsk where the people can no longer get out, in which case they moved to Leningrad. And we have been seeing mass surrenders at this point coming out of Leningrad. And as I told my audience before, this is it's good that they surrendered. I put it that way, because the alternative was that all of them were going to die. But I think there were 25 that ultimately surrendered in bulk. We don't know how many are left in the pocket, but obviously there's still some there. The New York Times has come up with their own reporting about it, and it's bad when the New York Times is actually reporting about what's taking place on the ground. And they came out with this article: "Its forces worn down, Ukraine moves to revamp military service." Now, that's a disturbing title, but the article makes the point: lack of food, lack of water, their inability to bring in more troops. They've come up with all sorts of schemes in order to try to get more people on the front lines. All of those schemes have fundamentally failed. Desertions are in the hundreds of thousands at this point. So you're getting more people deserting and more people dying than you are getting, basically dragging onto the front lines with their press gangs. This is obviously not a recipe for success. During the shutdown, there were no weapons given to Ukraine because the government was shut down. So there's that. And even when the government was on, the weapons have slowed. And so you have lack of manpower, lack of artillery and materials. You have lack of a capability to bring in more manpower. And you could see it as it's taking place with the Russian advance seems to be accelerating. There's a cauldron in Kupiansk. Russia's entered Kupiansk at this point. So there's that. And all of these things all of these cities are seemingly going to fall like dominoes, back to back to back, with Kramatorsk being the last stronghold in Donbass. Give me your take on this. I find this to be immensely tragic. I mean, obviously, I want Ukraine to lose, but, they're dragging random people onto the front lines, meaning I've seen them drag people walking their dogs. I've seen them drag pizza delivery people. I've seen them drag just random people that's on the street. And you think to yourself, okay, many of the people that are getting killed are these people who have very little training that are just being thrown onto the front lines as meat, to put it bluntly. Give me your take on this. What is going to be the consequence of Pokrovsk falling?
I mean, you look at this conflict, and it shouldn't still be happening. It never should have happened, but it continues.
Agreed.
And I mean, Ukraine has got barely anybody left. I mean, they're, like you said, they're dragging everybody off the street. Zelensky is wildly unpopular. If there was to be an election, he would lose. The people voted for Zelensky originally because he promised to prevent something like this from ever happening. He was the peace candidate who was going to make peace with Russia. I mean, the whole situation, it's like, I mean, you have to ask all these people that were out there with Ukrainian flags and all that, like has this really benefited the people of Ukraine? Like they're the big losers in this whole situation. You think about the fact that those bullets they're using have that poison dust on them, that depleted uranium. Their ability to grow crops is going to be completely done. I mean, even after this war ends, their ability to start their farming agricultural sector up once again is going to be much more difficult because of the the bullet depleted uranium and the substance that are out there. Do you think if they've lost a whole generation of young men and they're desperate, dragging everyone off the street? I mean, Ukraine has been the big loser here, and the way that they presented it was that America cares about Ukraine. America just cares so much about Ukraine. You care about somebody, you don't put them into this kind of situation. I mean, the idea that this was done out of concern for the Ukrainian people and their protection and their freedom and their, I mean, give me a break. I mean, they are the big. I mean, they forced them into a conflict that never should have happened. And they've lost everything. I mean, the religious persecution, that's a story that we're not hearing, of course. But, I mean, the fact that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been pretty much outlawed and they've gone after, the religion, the people there have been practicing for so long just because some bishop and clergy are not on board with a full-on conflict with Russia. And I mean, Ukraine is not a democracy. They outlawed pretty much every opposition party at this point. The elections haven't happened because Zelensky would lose. I mean, Ukraine, I mean, everything we've been told about this war is a lie. It was a war to defend a democracy. Ukraine is not that, pretty clearly. It was done out of concern for the Ukrainian people. Well, no, it was Ukraine, they tell us, was a peaceful country until this conflict began. No, the 2014 Euromaidan coup, the Alley of Angels, you look at that monument to all the children that were killed by the U.S.-backed government in Kiev since 2014, and all the slaughter in Donbass, and Russia, moving its forces in to protect those folks. I mean, there's just so many ways that the whole narrative is falling apart. And I mean, on some level, I mean, obviously there's a bigger story. They're trying to push Russia off the geopolitical stage. They don't like that Russia is selling oil and gas on the international markets as a competitor. But there's also like kind of a basic level of, I mean, there's a lot of money being made for the military industrial complex selling all these kind of weapons, and a lot of money laundering, just basic nepotistic corruption, money laundering. You look at the details of what was going on with what was it, Bankman and that cryptocurrency and all the money that they were just scraping every last dollar out of it. Donate to Ukraine, and I mean, that money was just being siphoned off, and there's a circle of people around Zelensky, a collection of oligarchs who've been enriching themselves, and everything we've been told about Ukraine is a lie, and it's a disgusting lie. And the Ukrainian people themselves have gotten the short end of the stick. They're the ones that are ultimately suffering for this lie. And the lies are all done with, oh, they're the victims, we want to help them. Oh, you look at this. Can this just end already? Like, what is preventing this war from just coming to an end? I mean, it should be over already. The people of Ukraine want it over. Russia would be happy to negotiate an end that would be reasonable. I mean, the whole world wants this to end. People voted for Trump in the United States because he said he was going to end this. Just end this conflict already. Just end this ugly mess that never should have happened, that is completely unnecessary. So much loss of life. Yeah, that's my reaction. I wish I could be more upbeat about it, but you just look at it. This is such a waste and just such a scam and such a ripoff and such an example of humanity at its worst.
Yeah, it's a catastrophe, to put it mildly. What is the leverage to end the war, though? That's the part that I don't see. Like, and I know that's a weird question of like, what do you mean leverage to end the war? Well, obviously, people should want wars to end, but as you pointed out, people are making a massive amount of money off of it. The amount of weapons that are being sold, it's not going to the American public, but it's going to a small bit of oligarchs somewhere. These aren't Europeans that are dying. These aren't Americans that are dying. And, as you point out, from the European and the American perspective, the objective is to go after Russia. And so if none of those groups are dying, and yeah, Europe is getting fleeced, agreed, but Europe doesn't seem to care about the fact that it's getting fleeced, then what is the leverage to actually end the war?
Well, that's a good question. Now, I told you a couple weeks ago when Kirill Dmitriev came to New York City, I had the opportunity of being with the press delegation that met him. He said he was meeting with unnamed officials from the Trump administration. He was actually meeting with Anna Paula Luna, who is the member of Congress from Florida, which is interesting. There's a lot of Russians in Tampa, Florida area, right? There used to be a Russian community center there, and when I went to the World Youth Festival in 2017, there was a big delegation from the Russian Community Center in Florida. And Anna Paula Luna is a member of Congress. She's a conservative. She's a Republican, a MAGA Republican, and she seems to be a big supporter of Israel, but she's also now really in favor of negotiating with Russia. And she seems to have stepped up, and she's playing an important role on behalf of the Trump administration in negotiating an end to the conflict. Russia says they don't want to meet until they're ending the war, right? There's not going to be a ceasefire where Ukraine just gets to regroup. There's not going to be a false end. Like, this meeting in Budapest will happen when they're ending the war, when they're signing the end to the war. And Russia's been adamant about that, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, why screw around? Why give a photo op and all of this if we're not actually ending the conflict? So I understand that. And that, all kinds of negotiations are being made behind the scenes. And there's talk about this Bering Sea tunnel connecting the United States via Alaska to the Russian Far East. And there's a lot of hope there. At the same time, the other thing that's weird. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a really important MAGA Republican, she has broken with Trump, it appears, around a lot of issues, the Epstein files, around Israel. She's very critical of Israel. She's kind of doing a media tour. She went on The View. She's gone on Bill Maher's show and all of that. And they're kind of, it's the Democrats are kind of using her against Trump, which makes sense. And that Trump has disappointed her and me and many other people when it comes to the Epstein issue, when it comes to Israel, et cetera. What's interesting, though, is that, we heard Trump denounce Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it was CNN, I believe, that raised the question about Marjorie Taylor Greene. But they framed it as, Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene is angry that you're having foreign policy meetings around the clock, not domestic policy meetings. And it almost sounded like they were trying to use Marjorie Taylor Greene to say Trump shouldn't be focused on negotiating an end to the war. He's focusing on that too much, which she has been critical of U.S. support for Ukraine much louder than anybody else. But it seemed like they're trying to kind of use Marjorie Taylor Greene and the anger of MAGA Republicans to say to Trump, stop focusing on trying to end the war. Like, he's doing something wrong by talking to Russia so much and focusing on ending this war. He's ignoring Americans' needs. There's some weird 3D chess going on. It's interesting. Marjorie Taylor Greene raises Epstein, which she's right, 100% right about, right? Trump said he was going to reveal the Epstein stuff, and he didn't do it. And she's raising it. She's met with the Epstein victims and all of that. What infuriates me is that there's a layer of people, and you know them as well as I do, that would have told you until Trump got elected again, they would have told you, if you said Jeffrey Epstein, they would have said, that's a conspiracy theory. Stop spreading conspiracy theories. There's no such thing as Jeffrey Epstein. That's just something you read on the internet. That's crazy QAnon stuff. Well, now that Trump is in office and the Epstein stuff is something they can use against Trump, suddenly Epstein is real and they care about it. Now, they should care about it. It's a real issue, so I'm not shaming them for caring about it. I'm just annoyed with the disingenuousness about, it didn't become a real issue until CNN gave them permission to make it an issue. But it's weird that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a huge critic of U.S. weaponry and U.S. arming of Ukraine, they're trying to use her break with the White House against negotiating an end to the conflict. She's saying, it's very weird. There's some weird 3D chess going on right now. I tend to think that the best faction in the Trump administration is Tulsi Gabbard, is the MAGA, the Thomas Massey, Rand Paul. Rand Paul was on TV denouncing the strikes on Venezuelan boats and saying this is absolutely outrageous. Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they kind of represent the best within the Trump faction or whatever. But then Marjorie Taylor Greene is kind of getting rolled out by the Democrats, and they're trying to use a lot of what she's saying in different ways. I noticed that, for example, when Marjorie Taylor Greene was on The View, They said, well, you no longer believe in conspiracy theories. And she said, well, my views haven't changed. And she said Russia collusion was a conspiracy theory. Then the host, one of the hosts of The View, said, oh, yeah, but Russia did interfere in the elections in 2016. And she said, no, Russia collusion is a conspiracy theory. And it's like, it's as if those documents revealed by Tulsi Gabbard was never revealed, right? And Trump, when he called out Marjorie Taylor Greene, I believe it was on Monday at the White House, he said, well, she's collaborating with the other side. She's being used by the other side. Well, what is the other side? I mean, it's all a big mess, right? And it's clear that, that Trump is at odds with the majority of the rich and powerful in the United States. He has his own agenda. But he's also at odds with the bulk of his base, right? That he's betrayed a lot of the promises that he's made. His base is angry with him. And on some basic issues, I mean, he said he was going to make the food prices go down, right? That was one of his big things, Biden inflation. Food prices are up. I mean, obviously he said no more foreign entanglements. I mean, he bombed Iran. He's threatening Venezuela. He hasn't ended the war in Ukraine like he said he would. I mean, Trump is doing pretty badly. I mean, he's doing pretty badly. The polls show Trump is wildly unpopular right now because the conditions in the country are bad. I mean, at least they did. I mean, I thank goodness this government shutdown came to an end. I mean, I predicted, and I still maintain, the reason it was the longest one in history was because both sides gained from it. The Republicans gained from it because it pushed austerity. They don't think people should be getting food stamps anyway, right? They don't believe that that government employees should be getting paid. They want to reduce the federal budget. They want to lay off government workers and all that. So the government being frozen helps them make the case we don't need to pay these people anyway. Whereas the Democrats want Trump to be viewed as an awful leader. They want, because of Trump, people are hungry. Because of Trump, people are not getting their food stamps, and that ultimately both sides were politically gaining from the government being shut down and the American people losing out. And then ultimately it was the airplanes, the air traffic controllers, the chaos at the airports. That's what ultimately led to a resolution, right? As they realized, okay, holiday season is coming up and we're already having chaos at the airports. We're not even close to Thanksgiving yet. If this continues and Thanksgiving weekend, there's chaos at our airports, that's going to be a disaster for everybody. We don't need that. We do need Americans to get on planes and go visit their family for the holiday and travel for Thanksgiving weekend and get on planes. And we can't have chaos at the airports for the holiday season. So that's kind of what ultimately led to a resolution of this. That's completely crazy. It's a symptom of the overall dysfunction of our politics at this point, where our leaders don't even feel like they have to they have to serve the people at all. And that's, it was funny during the election. I pointed out why there were two instances where Trump won, where Trump won with the voters, and two instances during the election last year where Trump, very clearly won over the voters. And it was because he was just trying, right? You remember working at McDonald's, Trump's little gimmick where he worked at McDonald's. Right. It was stupid. Yeah. He put on his little outfit. He went there. He obviously is not a low wage fast food worker, but he was trying. And Kamala Harris had lied and said she worked at McDonald's, which she never did. And so Donald Trump just put on the outfit and he went and did that. And then there was the instance where I think it was Biden called a lot of Trump supporters garbage. And so Trump got a garbage truck. And he got a garbage truck. And like none of this is serious. I mean, it's just politics 101. I mean, it's just like it was just common sense, right? Your opponent lied about working at McDonald's, so you have a photo op at McDonald's. They called your supporters garbage, so you get a garbage truck and, as a publicity stunt. Trump was just trying. It was like he was phoning it in, but he was trying. The other side felt like they were just so entitled to win. Everyone had to vote for them or else they're a bad person or they're a racist. And it was like there's so much entitlement from our political establishment. And Trump, at least was communicating, I have to earn it. I have to go through the motions of showing that I care about the voters and all of that. And that's why he won. And that, the government shutdown is an example of, neither side really felt that they were compelled to actually, Americans were suffering, food stamps, government employees not getting paid, people in the military not getting paid. They're suffering. And neither side felt like, oh, this is an emergency. We need to resolve this. They all felt like, whatever, we can solve this. And there's a level of entitlement. You think about Nancy Pelosi. How long has she been in office? Do you think there's a lot of people in San Francisco that are like, boy, I love Nancy Pelosi. I just want to go out and vote for her. I love Nancy Pelosi. Give me a break. No, I mean, you look at the Pelosi family, and it's a political family, and nepotism and corruption and all of that, and that there's our elite. The people running our country just feel entitled. They should be there. You have to vote for them. They're and it's like, and you talk about how old they all are, right? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
elderly, very, very elderly people that are part of corrupt political nepotistic networks that just feel like they can do everything they want to do. It's really funny because when the Soviet Union fell, many people commented that there was a level of cynicism that had set in, right? After the death of Stalin, you had Khrushchev got up and gave the secret speech and condemned Stalin, said all the stuff about Stalin was true. And that a level of cynicism kind of set in where people just didn't care. They didn't have big aspirations. They didn't have big hopes. They were kind of sarcastic when it came to the government. That's what we're seeing across America right now. That whole America, go get them. We're going to make money. We're going to go out and achieve our dreams. That's gone. I think about just how difficult, we're having an event January 11th, the Center for Political Innovation. And usually it's been quite easy to book a hotel. I have not had so much trouble booking a hotel in a long time. And I'm just in New Jersey and I'm just going around to hotels, but it's like every hotel is like, what? All right, well, you're going to give us $10,000 for food ahead of time or whatever. Well, it's not really worth our trouble. And it's like, it was very difficult to finally get the venue booked for our event because people just don't, it's like, why people don't care. Right. I mean, I just think about like, it's like, this is just a basic thing of like, I need to rent a hall to have an event or whatever. And it's like, do we have to? Yeah. I'm just thinking like, it's like, it's kind of like our people just don't care anymore. Right. The younger generation, they don't feel like they're going to go out and get rich or anything like that. Number one. Number two, people are very demoralized and cynical, and that, we've entered this kind of stage where the country is just kind of going through the motions. It's really tragic to see how, there's just this demoralization that has come over America since the pandemic. It has a lot to do with a corrupt political elite. It has a lot to do with, the fact that we can't trust what we're being told, and that America's not in a good spot right now. We're not in a great spot.
You use the term resolution. I would use a slight detour, but you use the term resolution. I would use the term capitulation. And I think there's a difference in those things. Like, yes, resolution in the sense of, okay, it's over. The government will reopen, I guess, tonight, I think, your time. But this was a capitulation. This was a surrender. Like, if we're fighting a war and the other side gives up, technically it's a resolution. But in reality, the other side gave up to allow the resolution to take place. And I don't mean to quibble with words, but I think there's a difference in those things. I have a different point of view. Okay. I would say let it stay shut down. I mean, if the Democratic Party is having this fight where their argument is, and by the way, I agree with everything else you said about cynicism and everything else. Agreed. If the Democratic Party is saying we need to shut the government down because we need to defend a broken healthcare system, and even though it's broken, it's better that people not pay 2 to 3 times more for their healthcare and their health insurance. And that's the flag that they plant into the ground. And they say, all right, this is our banner. This is what we're going to fight over. And the public, who is very angry at Trump for all of the reasons that you enumerated, effectively saying, look, my food prices are up, the energy costs are up, my expenses are up, my rent is too high. When I go to the grocery store, everything costs too much money. My health insurance has just tripled at this point, all of which is true, by the way. And so you can see Trump's approval rating going into the toilet. You can see Democrats getting elected, just random Democrats who offer nothing, who are milquetoast at best and completely ineffectual, win. And they're winning because of Trump. And Trump himself is saying, we're getting beat over this issue. Like we are getting blamed for what is taking place. And then you see that as a Democrat and say, well, obviously we need to surrender. There's something wrong with that. Like, it's not that I want people to suffer, nor do I want people to run out of food, nor do I want people to not be able to get home for Thanksgiving. But if you indeed fight over that issue, then you should continue the fight over that issue, meaning you should win that issue. And if Trump is trying to get rid of the filibuster because he wants to open the government, well, he's doing that because he's recognizing a pain that is being attributed to the Republican side on that issue. Who would they blame? Matters in a government shutdown. And I get there's consequences for it, but those consequences are meted out because one political side says, we want your expenses for healthcare to go up 3 times. That's what we want. And we're willing to shut the government down in order to ensure your healthcare expenses go up by 3 times. Even though the system is broken, even though Obamacare doesn't work like it's supposed to, even though people are already paying too much for healthcare, an argument can be made that, hey, shut it down for the pain itself. But in and of itself, though, you have effectively a winning position and you capitulate. There's something wrong with it. I agree with you. They don't care, because if they cared, they would have shut it. They would have kept it shut down until they came to fruition. Meaning, I agree with your with the argument of cynicism. The government, in real terms, feel like they don't need to care because ultimately nothing has showed them that they need to care. If that makes sense.
Yeah. What does the American people want around healthcare? They want Medicare for all. That's what they want.
Yes, they do.
Poll after poll has shown we want, the cost of healthcare to be nothing except whatever we pay in taxes. That's what we want. And nobody in the government is willing to stand up for that. Even people who claim to support it, right? Like AOC and, people like that, they claim they support that. They don't do anything about it. And I mean, the American people have very clearly spoken about what they think the solution to healthcare is. And the other thing is the Republican Party doesn't quite know where they stand, right? I mean, they have an ideological answer on the healthcare issue, which is, the market magically blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But what do we actually do? Okay, that's great. You've given us this ideological, free market neoliberal answer, but what do we actually do? Right now, we do have, health insurance HMOs set up by the state. We do have the Affordable Care Act on the books. So what do we do? And the Republicans don't have an answer to that. They just, government is not the answer. Right?
Obamacare is the Republican answer for it. That's the irony of all of this. Yeah. Like, meaning they're fighting tooth and nail to get rid of Obamacare. And it's like the Obamacare is just the Heritage Foundation plan, which was a Republican-led plan in regards to healthcare.
Yeah.
It is the Republican position. And they're doing any and everything in their power to get rid of it without anything to back it up. No, I agree with you. It's not that I disagree with the point that you're making. There is a deep cynicism that is seeped into our population. I don't know if that's a capitalistic thing. I only need to work when I get paid to work. I don't know if that's a fall down from government thing where it's like, okay, well, these losers aren't really doing their jobs. So, why do I need to exert myself if I don't have to exert myself?
Well, I don't know. It's like in the past, right? When you're talking specifically about my situation, how difficult it was to book an event. You go to a hotel or a conference center or whatever. You say, hey, I'd like to book an event. They have a salesperson talk to you, and they want the business, and they're desperate to get you to sign up and book it. And in this case, I was going to hotel after hotel. And it would be, I guess it's Joe, the sales guy who handles this. Oh, he's only in on Tuesdays. You'll have to come back next week. And, and then I would, I guess if you're willing to spend a huge amount of money, we could bring in our staff to do it. But we don't really feel like it. We're just kind of, and it was just kind of like there's not that entrepreneurial attitude. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's kind of like, it's like it used to be people were quite excited to sign something and get the deal, right? And now people are just kind of like, why bother? Like, what's the point? And it's kind of like, I feel like it's part of that, just kind of people are kind of stuck at home, and also, they're not going out as much because of the pandemic and all of that. And I also, that raises the question of how much of this stuff, people are afraid to show up for events in real life. I mean, the amount of political violence that has gone on, people are afraid they'll get shot, right? If they go to an event or something like that, and I've noticed that, and that it's very difficult to get, there's not a lot that goes on, as they say, IRL in real life anymore, right? Is that, a lot of stuff is online, and a lot of people are just kind of demoralized. A lot of people go to work, they go home, they turn on their screen, they watch whatever is there, and they're just kind of, this is that whole thing in CPI. We talk about living biologically, right? I mean, you're alive, but you're not really exercising any agency, right? You're alive in the biological sense, but not the spiritual sense. You're just kind of going through the motions. And I feel a lot of Americans have been reduced to living in a biological, just a purely biological way. They're technically alive. They don't feel any ownership over their lives. They don't feel like they can make a difference. And they're just kind of going through the motions. And it's an awful way to be, right? And I mean, you think about what depression really is for a lot of people. It is that just kind of that just going through the motions. They're just kind of going through the motions of life. They're kind of hopeless and frustrated. A lot of people feel that way, and it's coming across. I mean, and if you feel that way, if people at home feel that way, they're not alone, right? There's a lot of people. I mean, I'm just telling you, as I walk through the streets of New York City, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at people that are, that are very demoralized, and it's tragic to see that that's the case, because that's, as much as we can be critical of America in so many ways, and the history and all of that, one of the good things about America is that we had this optimism, this go out and achieve your dreams stuff, and that seems to be what's been totally deflated by the recent years. A lot of people that I work with were really disappointed by Trump. They really hoped that Trump would get in and change things, and he's been such a disappointment, and that's been demoralizing for a lot of people.
Let me ask you this. Is it even possible for Trump to accept a deal? I mean, any deal that Trump would accept, it would be under Russian terms. And Russia's not going to deviate from their terms. I mean,
Right.
Why should they? Losers don't get to dictate policy.
Right.
And so, the last time Trump had the conversation, I think it was Xi Jinping, Trump was like, well, they got to fight it out. They got to fight it out. Which means, on some level, I'm not threatening the tomahawks. Yeah, I'm doing the oil stuff. But for all intents and purposes, they're going to have to win this on the battlefield. And Russia is taking it upon themselves. I think John Helmer made the point of saying the Russians interpret Trump saying, well, they need to fight this out on the battlefield, as effectively the Russians are taking it as, get this done, finish this war. How do you see that? I mean, do you see it in those terms? I mean, because for all intents and purposes,
what worries me is I feel like perhaps there is a feeling on the part of the Trump administration that somehow they can end the war in terms that will not look favorable to Russia. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
Right.
And I feel like that's what's holding them up. And that's an awful, awful reason to hold up. I mean, people are dying on the battlefield, but it's like there's this fear that we can't end this war in a way that will look like Russia won. We have to end this war in a way that it looks like Russia gave up something or something like that. And it's so tragic because, I mean, what do they want? I mean, how could Russia win? Russia's not going to leave the Donbass. It's in the Constitution. Those places voted to join with Russia. But they're desperate. They have to have it be somehow that it looks like they made Russia give up something or something like that, and it's tragic. And that I think that they're fearing the media onslaught. They're fearing that, it'll be, Trump gave Ukraine away or something like that. Right. And I was hoping that, Tulsi Gabbard's revelations about, Russiagate being a hoax would make it easier for Trump. And I was hoping that, that a lot of the change in discourse, but I mean, that seems to be what may be the holdup. I mean, we don't know what's being said behind closed doors, but it looks like the holdup may be that they are just determined to end it in a way that looks good for them, and there's no way to do it. Kind of reminds you of the Vietnam War, right? That was Richard Nixon's thing. I'm going to bring an honorable end to the war in Vietnam. Well, how are you going to end an honorable? I mean, there was no honorable end to the Vietnam War. I mean, the USA was propping up a government in the south of Vietnam that didn't have public support. The people of Vietnam wanted to reunify their country. There was no honorable end to the Vietnam War. And how many people died, year after year as Nixon saying, okay, I wanted to end the war, but it has to be an honorable end. And finally, they just, pulled out anyway. I mean, they had no choice. And that's, I feel like that's the situation here. And that I like how Trump repeats that this war never would have happened without him being in there. That's an important point, because there's no way that he's going to end this and look like the big hero who stuck it to Russia. It's just not going to happen. So.
Agreed. And I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, when I think it was the New York Times was reporting behind the scenes that Trump was like, God, man, I don't want to look bad for this. I don't want to get blamed for losing the Ukraine war. I don't want to take the political heat for it. And of course, if you look at the media always takes this perspective as if the US president is God, man. It can do pretty much anything. And so if the president tries to back out of it, it's like, hey, are you really giving this to Putin? And that's going to be the way they're going to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're giving this over to Putin. You're giving this over to the Russians. But the Russians invaded Ukraine. I mean, everybody says the Russians invaded Ukraine. You're giving this over to them. And it's like, dude, what do you want me to do? And by the way, I've seen this with my own eyes. When Joe Biden, I was covering the Putin-Joe Biden summit in Geneva, Switzerland. Joe Biden goes to talk to Putin. They have their meeting. Both come out and give a press conference. They give individual press conferences. Putin pretty much talks to anybody and everybody about anything that they wanted to talk about. The Western media, as they were talking to Joe Biden, after Joe Biden gives his speech, Joe Biden is very conciliatory in the sense of, we're going to be working with the Russians. We're going to set up a joint venture in order to have conversations. So we will have back channel communications and vice versa, etc. And one of the reporters was like, hey, you're sounding a lot like Putin is sounding right now. Are you really accepting what Russia is doing here? Like going after Joe Biden, effectively, like not getting the hint that Joe Biden is like, look, we need to have some relations with Russia. Otherwise, this is going to get out of control very fast. That's not the way the media looks at this. No. Joe Biden blows up, says, you don't understand what is happening right now. And what his point was, look, we have no communications with him. And this can spiral out of control in a way that will be very bad for the rest of the world. You don't get it. You're sitting there at your press booth without having all of the consequences that I'm effectively stuck with, despite the fact that Joe Biden was initiating and progressing that war. That's what Trump is going to get. And that's what I don't think Trump ultimately wants. And he is very sensitive about this. Again, one last point. Trump, I remember, gave a speech. This was several months ago. And oftentimes when Trump would give his speeches, especially when he's talking about Ukraine, he would bring up the fact of, well, I went after Putin and I passed these sanctions and I did this and I did that. Because it almost feels like he has to feather his nest. He has to like bolster himself against criticism that he's working with the Russians, which also goes to the whole Tulsi Gabbard thing and the stuff that was releasing by Tulsi Gabbard. Like, meaning he still, it's almost as if he has nightmares about his first term, about being called a Putin puppet or Russian puppet, or that he got in because of the Russians, that he didn't get in on his own steam. And he feels like he needs to bolster himself against the criticism that comes his way in regards to any kind of thing that takes place. And so I could be wrong on this, I suspect that he thinks if I make a deal and the deal is not going to look like Russia lost or they gave up anything, that I capitulated, then they are going to once again say, I am a Putin plant, I am a Putin puppet, I surrendered to the Russians, I did this, I did that, which he doesn't want to do. The problem is, I don't know how you get out that box. Look, whether Russia takes all of Ukraine or not, you're still stuck with the fact that they're going to win.
Yeah.
But I don't know how Trump gets out of that, that box, because it is a box in that case. It's like, dude, you're going to look bad either way.
Yeah. When you think about how the press is just like demanding that Trump be more hawkish and demanding he be more hostile to Russia. And you look at, the fact that it seems like the common sense is coming out of the military. It's an odd, flip from the Cold War. During the Cold War, the way it was in country after country was that Russia and the Soviet Union had a lot of influence in what we call civil society, labor unions, academia, places like that. And in many countries like Indonesia, you'd have a president like Sukarno, who was elected because a lot of labor unions and community groups and a lot of college professors and a lot of human rights groups or whatever were sympathetic to the Soviet Union. And then the military would be tied in with the United States, and the military would overthrow the government. And the military, and we saw that all throughout the Cold War, and like in Latin America, in Chile, right? Salvador Allende, the civil society was sympathetic to Russia and all of that, but then Pinochet's with the military, the USA backs him and overthrows him. And what happened over the course of the Cold War is that the CIA realized, if we're going to beat the Soviet Union, we've got to get in on the civil society stuff. And that's where George Soros and the color revolution apparatus, and now the civil society stuff is largely funded by the United States, right? And it's, George Soros and USAID and all of this. And so, if you go to any African country or whatever, there'll be some group that's fighting for human rights or fighting for the rights of women. It's funded by the United States. It hates Russia and all that. And now it's the military of various countries that say, look, we just want to work in the economic interests of the country. We're not committed to some long-term human rights, George Soros agenda or whatever. And so like in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, the Union of Sahel States, and around the world, the military increasingly is sympathetic to Russia. And the civil society institutions are just live in this alternative world of like, we're fighting this crusade and Russia's right wing. And, they're like ideologically committed to this, this kind of woke regime change. I don't know what you want to call it. This ideology of imperialism with woke characteristics, if you want to call it that. Whereas you have a lot of people in the military that are just like, look, we can get a better deal if we work with Russia, et cetera. And then even in the United States, right, during the Cold War, it was the Pentagon that were the hawks that didn't want to negotiate, right? That when Jimmy Carter had the SALT Treaty, it was all these Pentagon generals took out ads in the New York Times condemning the SALT Treaty. How dare he? And, Carter was viewed as, and the Democrats were viewed as soft on communism. But now it's like the military, you got people like Tulsi Gabbard and others that are from the military that are just saying, we've run the scenarios, war with Russia, not a good situation. War with China, not a good situation. We're losing here. And then you have this instead of civil society being like activists and others that are like the voice of common sense, it's that civil society are people pumped full of this must spread chaos, must carry out human rights agenda, must destabilize and overthrow governments. It's interesting to see how all of this flipped. And part of it was an attempt on the part of the United States. They saw that, in the early years of the Cold War, because of communism, because of the Soviet Union, because of anti-fascism, the Soviet Union had really built a very, very effective mechanism for aligning civil society with them. And at the end of the Cold War, the United States realized we have to beat them at their own game. And that led to this flip now where it's now the military that is the voice of common sense, and civil society has been captured by, this bizarre kind of they took leftist ideals, and, that's what the Trotsky and the neocons book is about. They took kind of the sentiments of leftism and hijacked them to serve imperialism. And they've built this kind of civil society institution, this regime change industry that runs the civil society spaces now, that is, committed to regime change wars. And it's the military that is the voice of common sense. It's interesting to see how all of this has played out, and how, I mean, it's like a long chess game, you could say, a game that is being played where, if your enemy does one thing, you do the other. And, one thing that I keep coming back to, is in the lead up to the Second World War, every ideology was divided down the middle, right? If you were somebody in the United States who was, devoted to, fighting for Black liberation, one organization that was very popular in Harlem and in other parts of the country, especially in northern industrial centers, was the Nation of Islam. And they were a Black nationalist organization. Marcus Garvey had been suppressed by the American government and deported, but then Black nationalism kind of became, you had the rise of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was not sympathetic to the Allied powers in the Second World War. They thought the rise of Japan was a good thing because Japan was like a non-white country, et cetera. So they were, and they were quite suspicious of the U.S. side in the Second World War. However, in response to the Nation of Islam, you had the rise of this figure named Father Divine. And Father Divine was a Black minister who was fighting for Black liberation, building Black-owned businesses, kind of like the Nation of Islam, except he was on the side of the Soviet Union and the United States. And he was friendly with the Communist Party, and he supported Roosevelt. So if you were looking for, Black empowerment, Black businesses, building a religious movement for Black freedom, you could follow the Nation of Islam, and they were on the Axis side and against Roosevelt and against the USSR, or you could follow Father Divine, and they were on the other side. And a similar thing happened in conservatism in Britain, right? There was this guy named Oswald Mosley, and he was, the head of the British Union of Fascists. He was this wealthy conservative British guy, and he built this movement of young British men who were ultra patriotic, and they lived together, and they exercised, and they were healthy, and they didn't drink alcohol, and they were fighting for morality or whatever. And they were called the Black Shirts. right? And it was this ultra conservative, patriotic movement in Britain that was sympathizing with the Nazis. So the British government saw this and they said, oh shit, you know, we got this mass Nazi movement among conservative young men. So they created the Oxford Group and moral rearmament. And it was the same kind of thing of ultra conservative young men in Britain that are religious and don't drink alcohol and exercise and live together. And they supported the British government and they were anti-fascist and they were friendly to the Soviet Union and friendly to Roosevelt and all that. And it was the same kind of thing, but it was on the other side. And in the labor movement, the similar thing happened. If you were a labor activist who was inspired by communism and socialism, and you liked Roosevelt and you liked the Soviet Union, you liked Stalin, you were in the Communist Party. But if you didn't like Roosevelt, you thought he was a sellout, and you didn't like Stalin, you thought he was awful, and you didn't want to mobilize an anti-fascist effort, you could join the Trotskyites. And that every ideology was divided, and that in the name of every ideology, you could be on one side or the other. And that's what's happening now. I've noticed there are libertarians that are hawkish and crazy against Russia, and there are libertarians that talk common sense. There are people on the right that are crazy and hostile, and and there are people on the right that are talking common sense. And on the left, it's the same thing. There are a lot of leftists that are completely crazy and on board, and then there are some leftists that talk common sense, and that in the name of every ideology, you can find a way to be on one side or the other. And that's we think in our heads it's a battle of ideologies. It's not a battle of ideologies. In every ideology now, especially dissident ideologies, you have people that are wearing the label that are on one side and people that are wearing the label that are on the other. Religions even, right? There are Christians that are on one side and Christians that are on the other. Muslims that are on one side, Muslims that are on the other. Jews that are on one side, Jews that are on another side. And that it's like every space, every ideological space is being polarized over the question of which side are you on. And in the name of the ideology, people can be on one side or the other, but there are clear divisions in our society. There's a new economy rising in Eurasia, and there's a faction of our ruling class that is committed to all-out destruction of them. And there's another faction of our ruling class that says, well, maybe we can trade with them and make money. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting to see how all of this plays out.
Caleb, always appreciate talking to you, man. Always appreciate these conversations. I always learn something. You have a body of knowledge that is impressive, to put it mildly. You're able to write these books, and you're able to write these books for a reason. And you always show it when you come onto the show in regards to the breadth of conversation and topics that you can hit. Always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this. Caleb Maupin.
And just always fun to come on. You have great guests, and I'm glad to join them. And yeah, good times, man. You're doing great work. That. I wish you the best in your travels. We'll be in touch. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. Caleb is director for Center for Political Innovation. Caleb, show one or two of the books just so the audience can see them for themselves. I always like to give, what is that? Shameless plug. I always like to give a plug to my guests, especially
studying psychological warfare. We got The Danger of an American Years of Lead. I wrote that about the Luigi Mangione case, became much more relevant after the Charlie Kirk stuff. So about the years of lead in Italy. So yeah, I got plenty of stuff here. Divisions in the ruling class. It's kind of what we were talking about. Divisions in the ruling class, conflict within the U.S. elite from the Cold War to today. So yeah, good stuff.
Badass, man. Caleb, you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for this.
You too. Safe,
okay?
Yep.
Bye-bye. All right. We have come to the end. Shout out